Many companies think that having survived the pandemic, that the worst is behind them. However, they might be surprised to find that economic instability can strike at any time. To ensure that they can survive in any circumstances, leaders need to continually be looking for those silent business killers that are often lurking, even in seemingly healthy companies. I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for being part of our international community of industry leaders here on A Seat at the Table. Today we're joined by Stephen Blue, CEO of Miller Ingenuity and author of 5 best-selling books that teach senior leaders and CEOs how to increase profit, take market share, and beat the competition. In this podcast, Stephen will be talking about the warning signs of failure that he's seen in top international companies, the 6 silent business killers, and how you can avoid them, why too much success can lead to failure, and why conflict amongst colleagues can actually help companies avoid critical mistakes. One of the most critical things a company can have is top talent in leadership roles. However, finding and recruiting the right people can be difficult, especially in certain markets. That's why top corporations and even smaller enterprises rely on AsiaNet consultants to help them fill key positions. Since 1988, AsiaNet has been working in partnership with its global clients to help them make the right strategic hires. They have a well-earned reputation for being able to fill even those difficult-to-fill positions. So if you need to recruit new talent, or you think you might be doing that soon, head on over to their website. That's asianetconsultants.com. asianetconsultants.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes. Now let's sit down with Stephen and find out how we can avoid fatal mistakes in our companies. As we head into what looks like a challenging year, not that the past few haven't also been challenging, but it looks like 2023 is going to bring interesting new challenges. So a lot of companies are on heightened alert, so to speak, and they want to identify and try to hopefully avoid any of these potential dangers. You have identified what you call the 6 silent business killers. What are they, and how can companies avoid them?
Well, I'll start with probably the most compelling or interesting one. And what I've learned, the disadvantage to being older is you're older. The advantage to being older is you've kind of seen everything. And I really have. I've been in leadership now for about 40 years. I've been a CEO for 25.
Wow.
And in the C-suite for 35 or 36. So I've kind of seen everything from the top to the bottom of an organization. And I can tell you, as a CEO, anytime I feel like everything is going fine, this is one of the silent business killers identifies when life is great, life is not great. And every time I've sort of sat back, Jane, and thought to myself, I got this CEO thing down. I got everything's running on all cylinders, everything's fine. Then suddenly something goes wrong. So now when I feel that way, now I start digging in. And this is what I advise CEOs. If you think everything's going smooth, I guarantee you it's not. There are things that are about to go wrong or that are going wrong in your organization that you're just not aware of. And so that's the time to really dig in and see what's up. So now that's my early warning system, if you will. And a lot of companies, a lot of CEOs, when things are going fine, they just assume that things are always going to go fine. And that's just not the case. And so if you dig in hard and fast and really and completely, you'll find something that's wrong. But the tendency is I want to continue to feel good. Everybody wants that. Everybody wants to be secure and nobody wants uncertainty. And so sometimes CEOs won't dig in because they're afraid of what they might find. And that would be my number one silent business killer, is when you think everything's going great. The second one would be when your salespeople work for the customer. Now, that may sound kind of strange because any good sales guy will tell you, hey, the customer's always right. I'm here for the customer. I do stuff for the customer and all that kind of stuff. And sales guys, if you're not careful, will sell your company's soul to satisfy their customers. And customers, I got bad news for CEOs. Your customer does not want you to have a profit. And in fact, your customer would just soon put you out of business, squeeze you as hard as they can to get whatever cost concessions they have, whatever delivery or service concessions they want. And they really don't care if especially the big companies, are like that. General Electric is a great example. They love to squeeze their suppliers, and I get that. I mean, I squeeze mine too. But when the salesman identifies more with the customer than they do with you, that's a silent business killer. Sales guys love to go to trade shows. And I'm death on whether we should be at a trade show or not. If you can give me the yield, you can tell me the marketing result that I'll get or the sales increase that I'll get by being at a trade show. Okay, fine. But sales guys love to go to trade shows because they get to hang out with their buddies, the customers, and they get to bring their spouses with them and they get to play golf. They have a great time. And when it comes to price increases, they hate to do a price increase. Why? Because these people are their buddies, they're their friends, and they're afraid of upsetting them, upsetting the apple cart. And so if you have a sales guy or a sales team that identifies more with the customer than with your own company, that is a business killer, and you'll never know it even until it's too late. I'd say the third most important one is let's assume you're a manufacturer and you've got a factory that's running on all cylinders, everything's going fine, and your costs are sort of stable and it's not a problem. They aren't rising. Maybe they're rising a little bit. And if for the longest time you're not reducing your cost in your factory, that's a silent business killer because as we know, especially now with inflation, what it is, your costs always go up. They're going up whether you recognize it or not. And it's, plus or minus in a normal year, 2% a year, 3% a year. Your healthcare expenses go up by 10% a year. So if your manufacturing cost, your cost of sales is not rising, it doesn't really matter because everything else is. And so you have to compensate that for some fashion or another. And so if you're not reducing your cost in your manufacturing operation every single year, that's a silent business killer. And what happens, Jane, is by the time you actually realize that all these other costs, kind of caught up to you, it's too late. Then it's a fire drill. How do I reduce costs like right now in my manufacturing operation? And that would probably be the third most important one. I'd say the fourth one is a lot of companies rest on their legacy products laurel. So in other words, I've got a product out there and I got a bunch like this that have, performed well. Margins are good, been in the market for a long time. But, if you look at the curve on any product, as you know, the curve goes up in the beginning and then it peaks out in terms of sales and whatnot. Then it goes down every year. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to take a look at your product lines and see where they are in the curve. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, okay, it's sort of going down like, 1% a year, 2% a year, not a big deal. Well, factor that out. I like to look over the long term. And this is what I advise CEOs. Look at 10 to 15 years from now. It doesn't take long to realize that at some point in time, the product becomes either obsolete or even worse than that is the cost exceeds the yield on the product. And that's probably fourth most important silent business killer. Now, the one that's most prominent, and you see this in General Electric, you see it in NASA, you see it in Boeing, I see it in a lot of the companies that I've studied, is everybody wants to make nice in a meeting. And I hate this. When you're sitting in a meeting and there is no conflict, there's something wrong there because the world is full of conflict. The business world is full of conflict. And the phrase that I hate, and I'm death on this, is and people do this all the time. They say, let's take it offline. What the heck does that mean? Well, I know what it means, right? People generally think that the boss does not want to have conflict in his team. And many CEOs, senior leaders, they don't want conflict because they don't like conflict. Conflict's uncomfortable. Conflict's difficult to deal with and so forth. And I never let anybody take anything offline. I say, the other thing, Jane, that I don't like is people after the meeting, they want to have a meeting after the meeting. Oh, yeah, here's what I want to say. And, I didn't want to say that. No, stop. We're going back now. Okay, we're going back into that meeting, calling them all together. And I want you to tell them exactly what you told me. And that is what caused, in a great part, the Boeing 737 MAX disasters, buried in hidden conflict. Because there was conflict all around about that. There was the disagreement. There was all kinds of reservations about extending that platform, but no one brought it up to where it needed to be brought to deal with it, or they weren't allowed to. take your pick, either one. And so what I advise, not only do I tell my teams that conflict is not only okay, it's expected and demanded of you. And that may sound a little strange because you sit in a meeting and they're going, "Oh yeah, okay, everything's fine." No, 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 no. Now I can tell that you've got a problem with this. Why don't you raise it? Let's talk about it. Conflict is a good thing if it's addressed and it's acknowledged and it's managed properly. And that probably kills more organizations than anything else that I can think of.
That's very interesting.
And you have to productively manage the conflict. You can't let it get out
Right.
of control so then people hate each other and they can't talk to each other after the meeting. Very often, especially early in the process of conflict management, I bring in a industrial psychologist, a PhD, who's really good at this, and I have him help facilitate the meetings and facilitate the process of conflict. And then I teach the principles of conflict management to all of my senior leaders so they can practice it one level below them.
Wow, I think that's really remarkable, but I can understand why, particularly in certain company settings, that could be game changing. I mean, as you pointed out,
Yeah.
in probably a worst case scenario is what happened to Boeing, but there's probably things that might not be that drastic, but that could have been avoided had people had that platform to debate, so to speak, and been able
Yeah.
to do it in a way that doesn't leave people at odds afterwards.
Well, that's the key is one, identify it, two, productively deal with it. And then once people are comfortable with this, once they're comfortable with the boss is okay with conflict and you teach them the principles of how to deal with it on their own, they start doing it all by themselves. And that's where the kind of the magic happens.
I think that's an interesting skill, and it's something that really just about nobody else has brought up, is the importance of, on the one hand, being willing to accept conflict, but on the other hand, understanding how to manage it so that it doesn't create these irreparable damages within
Right.
teams or within companies. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah, to pretend conflict doesn't exist in an organization is foolish. It does.
Right.
It does at home. It does in your church. It does in the school systems. It's everywhere. But it's generally a dynamic that's not recognized and not treated. And that's a tragedy. You look at NASA, the Challenger disaster, that was, I don't know, $22 rubber seal.
Right.
Some seemingly insignificant part. There was all kinds of information around that. Everybody knew it, but nobody wanted to, and it was a conflict.
Right.
No one wanted to handle that conflict straight on, so therefore it got buried. And the guys at the top, if they knew that maybe it was $100 part, I can't remember, Jane, but it was in terms of the overall cost of the mission, it was nothing. If the guys at the top had known that part had conflict around it and could cause that kind of disaster, you think they'd have said, okay, let's go ahead and launch?
Right.
But they didn't.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And you're right. Most people are adverse to conflict. I mean, I err in that area as well.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Certainly we're brought up that we want to create harmony within a company, within teams.
Yeah.
And you're right. Sometimes addressing conflict is part of doing business successfully. It's something that's part of the hard work that defines a good leader.
It's a so-called soft skill, right? It's like culture, right? I talk a lot about culture. I write books about culture. And, for the longest times when I use that term, CEOs would give me the deer in the headlights looks like, no, I don't. Just talk to me about the hard stuff,
Right.
market share, cost of improving a product or whatever. Don't talk to me about that soft stuff because it doesn't have any place in the C-suite. Well, actually it does. The soft stuff is what creates the hard stuff in any business.
Yes, exactly. You've mentioned General Electric a couple of times. You have a case study that you've done where you talk about what caused a company that was once as lauded as General Electric, that was sort of held up as an icon of success, And yet, as we all know, they fell from grace. What went wrong there? What can other companies do to avoid a similar fate?
It's a complicated question, and General Electric, when you try to look from the outside in, never been easy to find out what's going on with General Electric because they didn't want you to. And for
Right.
the longest time, they were really good at it. One of the bigger issues, in my view, that occurred with General Electric is they were really big into managing earnings. That's the reason they bought into the financial world, they bought into the entertainment world, and so they could move earnings one place to another. And I wouldn't say they were concealing or manipulating, but after a while, when you can manage earnings, and it sort of doesn't matter because I have all these other entities that I can push expense out into this one, move revenue in from this one, then after a while, they started thinking that, especially not necessarily the top guy, M. Elton, Jack Welch before him, whoever succeeded him, but the people in the middle and down below, especially in the middle, start thinking that there's nothing that can go wrong here. Everything's fine. Our earnings were always good. And it wasn't because of performance. It wasn't because of an individual business unit performance, because some performed poorly, some performed better than others. But when they were moving earnings in and out, people started getting the impression and getting the belief that whatever they did was going to be fine. And so therefore they don't look around for what might not be fine. And with General Electric, NASA was the same way. Boeing, for sure, they never uncovered what the root causes were of their decline, because it wasn't immediately apparent from one quarter to the next, or in some cases even 1 year to the next. It was, people had the sense that don't worry about it, we can keep on doing everything we've done because we'll just push expenses out, move revenue in, whatever the case may be. And that was, in my view, that was the biggest problem, that because GE used to be, the miracle at Crotonville. They
Right.
used to be the example of leadership, and under Jack, and they were just the model to follow. But then over time, I think mostly because the culture became ingrained in this, what I call it, management of earnings systemology, then the culture started getting arrogant and thinking they could do no wrong because they had one success after another. And then the mindset is, I did great, nothing can go wrong now. And then you get arrogance, and then arrogance follows hubris, and arrogance go together. You could see that in any company that I've looked at. Those are the sort of the twin towers of doom, hubris and arrogance. I'll give you a quick example of that, because I've been guilty of that too. This is the reason I know a few things, because I've done a few dumb things. And I remember one time I started a trade show in Mexico, and it was the first time anybody had done it. And it was pretty risky. And it was a personal thing. It wasn't part of a corporate thing. And it was a fabulous success. It was a phenomenal success, made a ton of money. And I was like, when I came off that, Jay, and I'm thinking, I got this entrepreneurship stuff down. Boy, am I smart. And so then within months, started a broadcasting company out of Havana, Cuba. Now, this was in the days where you can still go, but it's difficult. You couldn't just go there. So I had to get a license from the Department of Commerce. I hired a film crew out of Mexico, brought them down, and every dollar I made out of the Mexican deal, I put into the Cuba deal, because I thought I could do no wrong. And you know what? The Cuba thing was an absolute disaster. I lost my shirt at that. The reason I was so confident was because of my success of the Mexico adventure. And ever since then, I've learned, okay, some are going to work, some are not going to work, but don't always assume that you're so smart that everything you're going to do is going to work. And I think that's in large part what goes wrong in big companies to begin with at all, but particularly General Electric.
That's really interesting. And you're right. There's a lot to unpack around General Electric and what happened and where did the train jump the track, so to speak. I think that perhaps what you're saying is that you need to keep each project somewhat siloed. Is that correct?
Yep. Everything's got to stand on its own, and you have to assume in anything you do. I have a friend of mine who, very smart guy, he says, I don't mind if you risk a pail of milk, just don't risk the cow. And when people make huge bets, which is a dumb thing to do in any event, you have to sort of measure it with, you have to think to yourself, this could fail. How could it fail? Why would it fail? How do I protect my downside risk? Bigger companies tend not to do that. They get caught up in their own inertia, Jane. And if you were to dissect and analyze the culture of a big company, it would be a mess. It wouldn't be one culture. It would be dozens of cultures and dozens of departments and dozens of levels, and it would be an absolute mess. And they don't compartmentalize what they're doing so they can understand what really went wrong or what really went right that could have gone wrong. That's when things start going wrong.
It's interesting. I don't certainly have your expertise or breadth of vision, but it does appear that when you're a large company, you're so heavily managing to drive top line that you are almost forced to take these big risks. Whereas if you're a smaller enterprise, you tend to be more focused on managing the bottom line because you don't have the safety net, so to speak, to fail. Right? You don't have banks that are willing to continually restructure loans or suppliers where they can't afford to drop you, even if you haven't paid or, so forth. So therefore, you have more leeway with your bottom line, and yet you have pressure, particularly if you're a public company, to really drive that top line. I mean, not that people in and of themselves don't make bad judgments, but do you feel that puts an inordinate amount of pressure on management in these companies to drive the top line at all costs?
Yeah, and that's a really good question because top line does not equal the bottom line.
Right,
and
right.
Big companies tend not to view it in those terms. One of the biggest lessons I ever learned in my career was I was an executive at a turnaround.
Right.
And for any audience members that don't know what that is, it's basically the company's going to die if you don't, like save it like now. And in this company, it was in deep, 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 dark financial trouble. And we would have to make decisions on a monthly and sometimes a weekly basis. Are we going to pay the utility bill this month or are we going to make payroll?
Wow.
So that taught me an awfully good lesson over you got to watch your bottom line. You got to watch your expenses. You got to watch, top line's okay, but, without the bottom line, there is no top line. And ever since then, Jane, and that was, I don't know, almost 30 years ago, I have an obsession with expenses, and I have an obsession, and I'm not a detail guy, but one detail I watch every single day is order intake. And every single day I watch expenses, every single day. And if order intake is not what it should be 2 or 3 days in a row, I'm asking the sales guys, what is going on with our order intake? And by the way, never believe a sales guy that tells you, don't worry, boss, we'll make it up next quarter. I don't want to hear that.
Right.
Because my philosophy is you make the numbers today, then you'll make the numbers this week. If you make them this week, then you'll make them this month. And if you make them this month by month, then you'll make your year. So you have to have an absolute obsession with expenses and order intake. Those are the two things that really drive a business.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point. And I think that oftentimes people do get caught up in the hype of not only having to drive that top line at all costs, but I think the other thing is this compulsion to innovate. Not that we don't want to innovate. And of course, you have to keep new products in the pipeline. But I don't know what you're seeing around that. But do you feel that people sometimes put aside orders and bottom line expenses because they're very focused on just driving innovation for the sake of driving innovation?
Yeah, that's a mistake. When we innovate, every time we've made some bigger bets in innovation, and I've done that a few times in my career, but what I say is, it has to earn its keep.
Right.
We're not just going to throw money at this because you can throw an infinite amount of money, as you know, into a development. And some of them by nature and by design are years in the payback cycle. But I always say, let's spend a little money on innovation and then let's stop and let's see how it goes. Okay, if we're happy with what the customer reaction is to it, if we're happy with the specs meeting what we wanted them to meet, then we'll spend a little bit more money. You start off with what they call a minimum viable product. And if that turns out and all the signals are green, spend a little bit more money, see how that goes. If all the signals are green, but the biggest problem, what happens is, Jane, is when the signals are red. This is what your point is. They keep spending money because I remember one time it wasn't me, but I was in the organization and we spent millions and millions of dollars on this new product development. It just wasn't working out. And The president of the company insisted on continuing to spend more money because we've spent all this money. We've got to get something out of it, otherwise we'll look bad. And
Right.
that's a big dysfunction in bigger companies, is the executives don't want to look bad. They'd be better off saying, made a mistake, realize it, stop, okay, it's gone. The money's gone, can't do anything about it. But my philosophy is, spend a little. If everything's fine, spend a little, but don't spend the whole enchilada and then hope everything works out on the other end, because that's just a fool's errand.
I think that's very true. And it is difficult because once you put money into something, you are backed into a corner to prove that that was a good decision. So
Yep.
like you said, you continue to throw good money after bad, as opposed to
Yeah.
simply writing it off as, well, this didn't work and we need to do something different.
Yeah, and it's ego gets involved, which is not a good thing in any situation. The other thing that gets involved is the person that made that decision is afraid he's going to get fired because he made a dumb decision. And that's people should be, if you admit you made a dumb decision, you realize what you've done wrong, and you change course, you should be applauded for that, not fired for that. But you spend bazillion dollars in a big corporation, it doesn't work out, you're probably going to get fired. And what kind of a signal does that send to everybody else in the organization? It's don't take risks, don't take chances. What you want to encourage in an organization, Jane, is transparency.
Right.
Tell me when you're uncomfortable with something. Tell me when you think it's going wrong. Tell me when you think you want to do something different, and let me, as a level above you, make the choice as to what. But don't fool me into thinking it's all good when it's not.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is something that needs to infiltrate through the whole organization, because when people live in a culture of fear, people don't address things. They put it in a drawer, so to speak,
Yep.
rather than
Yep.
come to the boss and say, this is a problem, or I don't understand this. You feel compelled to want to maintain that, don't worry, I've got this, but instead you just bury the problem. And then, like you said, that tends to bite you in the back when you least expect it.
It does. And most corporations have cultures of fear. I couldn't say all, I haven't been in all, but I've studied a bunch of them, and I've been running a bunch of them for 40 years. And most of them have cultures of fear. And that's just sort of, GE is guilty of that. That was a very, maybe still is, was a very intimidating culture. Jack Welch would beat the snot out of you if he didn't like an answer you gave him. I mean, and that's a fact. I mean, you can read that anywhere. And then cultures have their own DNA. You can change the people at the top, but the DNA of the culture still survives unless you really fiddle down below and the other levels of the organization. And fear is what drives a lot of bad decisions, and some good ones in defense of them, but mostly bad decisions. And that's what I call a toxic culture. And when I was at that turnaround, it was a very toxic culture. I mean, of fear. We'd come to meetings that would start at 6 a.m. and wouldn't end until like 9 p.m.
Oh
And
my
it was
gosh.
it was what I call beatings, not meetings. And the president would, you got to come back, and I need a better answer than that. You leave the room, don't come back until you get a better answer. Well, people will come back, give him the answer that he wanted, right? Made him feel
Right.
better in the short run. It was such a toxic culture that I would, and thinking about coming to work in the morning, I'd get literally sick to my stomach. And I swore I would never work for a company that was like that again. And if I ever ran a company that was like that, I would change it toot sweet, which is what I've done for the rest of my career.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes you have to have been in that environment to really understand not only why it's unpleasant to work there, but also, as you're pointing out, how damaging to the company itself, right? There's a lot of the disasters that you mentioned earlier on could have been avoided if the culture itself was different. It sounds easy when we're sitting here discussing it, but certainly when you're trying to run a company that's quite complex in a challenging market, it's easy to forget about these things, like you say, and you're just trying to drive that top line and stay in business and outperform your competition, and everything else just tends not to happen.
Yep, it doesn't, because there's never any time for that. There's never any time in a big corporation for what's most important. What's most important is to understand what's going on right now in the organization and make sure it's going the way you want. I did a consulting thing with the president of a university. She's new in the job, got a toxic culture, and wanted some advice on how you change it. So you take it one layer at a time. The first layer below you, you clean that up, then you get people in it that you like and that support your values and your vision. And it's a long process. It isn't, but most CEOs want to check it off the box and be done with it and move on to the next thing. And that's a mistake. Your point is well taken, Jane. That takes years.
And years is a timeline that certainly nowadays nobody wants to hear. People want, with not just within leadership, but in everything, people want things to be done more or less in weeks.
Yep. You want to lose weight now. You want to get a date now. You want to make more money now. You want to get whiter teeth now. You name it. In corporations, especially public ones, the street has no tolerance for that.
Right. Exactly.
They're part of the problem. But, I can't fix the street.
Yes,
exactly.
Well, Stephen, you've shared so many interesting insights, and I know I've learned a tremendous amount. How can people reach out to you? How can they connect with you?
I suppose the easiest way is my personal website, which links to my professional website.
Okay.
And my personal website is just easier to spell. It's StephenLBlue.com. Excuse me, StephenLBlue.com. And that'll link you to Miller Ingenuity and my LinkedIn and all that. Miller Ingenuity is just too hard to spell.
Well, I'm going to put those links in the show notes so that people can find them. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here.
My pleasure. It was a pleasure talking with you, Jane.
Thanks again, Steve. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, AsiaNet Consultants. AsiaNet's a specialist in recruiting top talent in Asian markets. Since 1988, AsiaNet has been working in partnership with its global clients to help them make the right strategic hires. They have a well-earned reputation for being able to fill even those difficult-to-fill positions. Learn about how they can help you find the best talent by heading over to their website, AsiaNetConsultants.com. That's AsiaNetConsultants.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me here on A Seat at the Table. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something from it, I would love to hear about it. If you'd like to support the show, please hit the subscribe button. And if you can take a minute to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or other channels, that would be fabulous. Don't forget to check out our podcast website, seatpodcast.com. That's SEAT podcast.com. If there's something you'd like to share, ideas, suggestions, or comments, please feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining me and being part of our international community. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.